Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. Well, today we're going to dive back into some Jack Rackham. It's been a while since I've done one of his videos. I think I've only done a couple. I can't always remember who I've covered and who I haven't when it's one I'm not familiar with doing regularly. But this one is History Abridged, The Axis, and it came out about a week ago. It showed up in my recommendeds. I thought it looked interesting. We haven't talked about World War II for a little while, so I'll put the link down in the description. You can check it out without my commentary. I want to thank Ivan. You live in Charlotte, so I'm going with the more American-sounding version of the name, but I don't want to get it wrong, so I'll use both. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. Couldn't do it without you. Let's dive into this one.
33. Italian dictator Benito Mussolini has been in power for a decade. He knows Italy isn't a great power yet, but he believes he can get there with the right leverage. When World War I...
So, interesting thing about Mussolini is that at one time he was like an elementary school teacher. A very interesting background. He was a pacifist at one time. Not at all like the very militarist backgrounds of the other two leaders. Of Japan and Germany. But also kind of interesting that Japan and Italy actually start out as enemies of Germany. They're in World War I. They're on the side of the Entente, the Allies.
Unended, France was really mad at Germany and punished Germany super hard with reparations, territorial concessions. Basically, they blamed Germany for the deadliest war Europe had ever seen, and they wanted Germany to pay for all the damage done across the continent.
Now, he says France, but obviously it's all the Allies, but France is the main ally of the great powers that win World War I. They're the ones that take the brunt of the fighting. More fighting takes place in their country than anywhere else during this war. They take a massive number of casualties. Their commanding general is the one who is the Allied commander-in-chief. He's the Eisenhower of World War I, and Ferdinand Foch. And yeah, this area of Alsace and Lorraine is an area that had been fought over for centuries. It had been taken by Germany in the settlement after the Franco-Prussian War. When the German Empire is first formed, they take that territory, and so France is just getting it back. And it's gone back and forth, and it's got a lot of French and German heritage there.
So in the 1920s and 30s, Germany was in economic ruins and was really mad at France. According to the Treaty of Versailles, signed at the end of World War I, Germany wasn't allowed to build up its army again, but little by little they'd been bending the rules. Some training exercises with the Soviets here, some private armies there. Some secret experiments here, some weapons from Mussolini there. Mussolini sees Germany on course for a war of revenge against France, and he thinks if he can be on the winning side of that war, then Italy can finally make it big. And good news, Mussolini! In 1933, Hitler comes to power in Germany, and he's wanted an alliance with Italy since the...
I love democracy. So, yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, Italy... in the early part of the 20th century, they're part of this triple alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary. It's more of a defensive pact, and so it doesn't really apply when it comes to the system of alliances that end up triggering World War I. They're out of it at first. They really, more than anything, want some territory back from the Austro-Hungarians that they believe is theirs. And when the Allies promise it to them, they jump in 1915 on the side of what we call the Allies, the the Entente, and Japan kind of jumps in later on in the war as well for the same reason. They want to see at the table for negotiating because there's a lot of little islands and territories and settlements and things like that in the Pacific that countries like Germany have that Japan would like to get their hands on.
The 20s. Fascismos are fascist bros, am I right? Oh, but bad news. Hitler is getting ready to Anschluss everybody. I mean, he is getting ready to steal any piece of land that isn't nailed down. In particular, he really wants to take over all of the places that speak German.
Yeah, and, people talk about, traditionally we say that September 1st, 1939, the German invasion of Poland is the start of World War II. It certainly is the start of the war in Europe. It's what triggers France and Britain getting into the war. But I honestly think that Germany thought that the same thing would happen when they sent troops into Poland that had happened when they went into places like Czechoslovakia and Austria, that the Allies would just roll over, that they would kind of say, okay, whatever. I think he was probably at least a little bit surprised that it ended up triggering a war.
That's bad for Italy because they may have taken a little piece of German-speaking land after the end of World War I. Good news, Hitler wrote in his book that the German speakers in Italy don't even matter to him because he wants an alliance with Italy so bad. Bad news, Italy's ally Austria also speaks a lot of German, and Hitler is a compulsive liar.
That's true. All true.
No regular sponsor on this video. If you want to visit Japan with me, May 2025, we're touring historic sites with awesome local guides. Algorithm didn't like that announcement video, so I want to make sure everybody who might want to go gets to hear about it. There's a link below with more info. I went in 2020.
Awesome. I wonder if he's doing that through the same company I go through. I'm going to check that out. I'm curious. So he is. That's pretty cool. I hope it goes well for him.
23, I loved it so much I came back to live there for 6 months. Amazing experience. Also, big thanks to my patrons. My next 2 videos are over on Patreon in script form, available for all paid members. So Mussolini would really like to keep Austria around as a buffer state between himself and Hitler.
This is a pretty common thing to have buffer states. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Belgium was created in the first place, was to add that buffer state in a really important region between Germany and France.
Is really not happy about that. He goes all the way to Italy to meet Mussolini in person. Mein Freund, will you at least tell the Austrians to put just a few Nazis in charge of their country?
And why would I do that?
Because Nazi domination is inevitable.
So why do you need my help?
You are too smart. You see right through my cunning charade. We will not meddle in Austria. Italy is too strong and powerful for us to make you angry. The next month, the Chancellor of Austria is assassinated. Hitler says he has no idea how that happened. I mean, yes, the assassins were Nazis, but they weren't German Nazis. They were Austrian Nazis, and they're very naughty boys. But anyway, it looks like the Austrian Nazis are doing a coup, and maybe the German Nazis could help them out just a little bit. Except, Mussolini sends his army to the border with Austria and says Hitler better not try it.
This is fascinating because you don't hear a lot about this part of history where, and this I think should be kind of a glimpse into what is to come, which is though allied kinda Germany and Austria, or Germany and Italy, it was really always more about the personal connection between these two guys than it ever was about strong political and military connections between Germany and Italy. And we see that by the fact that the minute that the mainland of Italy gets invaded by the Allies in 1943, Italy's like, we're out. And remember, too, that Italy still has a king, even though he isn't really the one exercising authority, and that's Mussolini. In this case, it's not like by removing Mussolini, there's suddenly this complete vacuum of power. They've got a system they can default back to.
And shoot, he doesn't. Hitler backs down with his tail between his legs. Of all the European powers, the one that actually stopped Hitler from doing Hitler things was fascist Italy.
Yep.
Mussolini, now properly angry, decides to make an alliance with France in 1934 in order to declare war on Germany if Hitler's army ever sets foot in Austria. In April 1935, Italy, France, and the UK get together and say Hitler has gone far enough. They are all committed to the independence of Austria and making sure Germany's military doesn't get even a tiny bit stronger. This actually happened. Mussolini was teaming up with the good guys.
He should have at least put them in a picture with FDR and like Neville Chamberlain instead of Truman and Churchill, who weren't in authority yet.
in order to end appeasement, spearhead a possible war against Hitler, and maybe that timeline could have prevented the invasion of Poland or the fall of France.
That's actually a really interesting point. I didn't know we were going to get into a little alternate history here, but what if Italy does stay on the side of France and Britain when all of this goes down? What if they do stand up against an Anschluss of Austria? What if the Western Allies are a little more forceful in their opposition to what Hitler does in taking the Sudetenland, things like that?
Unfortunately, 2 months later, Hitler bats his eyes at Britain, says, "Oh, pretty please." And Prime Minister MacDonald says, "Oh, come on. You know I can't say no to those puppy dog eyes. You can have a bigger navy, but there's gonna be a new red line, and this time we really mean it."
And we're going to move it about 4 more times before we actually draw a line in the sand with Poland.
So that ship had sailed. Interestingly, Hitler at the time was actually thinking he might be able to form an alliance with Britain against France and the USSR. That would have been an interesting timeline, but obviously...
Yeah, and I think if he had had his way, he always was willing to defer to, at the very worst, a neutrality with the British. I don't think he wanted war with Britain. He was okay with war with the Soviets, certainly, even though he kind of makes that non-aggression pact there for a while with the the treaty. But this is what happens when I'm in the middle of recording. I can't remember things like that. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But they were the enemies. When he wrote about it, there were the Jews and there were the Bolsheviks, and they were kind of equally bad in his mind. So it was inevitable he was going after the Soviets, but if he could keep the other guys pacified and kind of not too aggressive, I think he would have been okay with that.
Obviously, that didn't go anywhere. Now it's October 1935, and even though Hitler's still moving the goalposts, there's hope that an alliance of France, Britain, and Italy will be enough to keep Germany contained. Except Mussolini, being fascist, thinks he should be allowed to have a big colonial empire just like everybody else, so he goes and invades Ethiopia.
A little bit of hypocrisy there, right? No, we don't want Germany to move into Austria, but we're going to go down and deal with some territory in Africa.
This puts Britain and France in a pickle. They could stand up for their morals and intervene on behalf of Ethiopia against Italy, yes, but yikes! World War I was big and scary and awful, and they really don't want to do that again. And if they go to war with Italy, they will be losing a valuable ally in the fight against Hitler.
Remember that the people who are now in power in these countries are the generation who fought World War I. These are the people who were 20, 25, 30 years old, and now they're 45, 50, 55 years old. And this is really fresh in their minds. The millions of deaths, the carnage, the horror of trench warfare and gas and machine guns and artillery. They are really not in a hurry to go to another war like that.
Is still the greater evil, no matter how hard Mussolini tries. But if France and Britain let Italy get away with this, besides tacitly subjecting Ethiopia to colonial rule by literal fascists, they'll also be setting a really bad example. So instead, they chose a third option. And it's somehow even worse. When Italy invades Ethiopia, France and Britain convince the League of Nations to pass sanctions on Italy. Kinda weak sanctions.
Sound familiar at all? The League of Nations is the forerunner to the United Nations. League of Nations didn't have as much power because you don't have countries like the United States in it. And it realizes pretty quickly the minute it tries to put its foot down that it has no power.
They tried to convince Italy to maybe take just part of Ethiopia while
Please
they
do, Jay,
continued
don't
to
take the
trade
whole
oil
Ethiopia.
with them. And when Italian ships sailed through the Suez Canal on their way to bring soldiers to Ethiopia, the British troops controlling the canal said, "We'll let you in, but we're not happy about it." So Mussolini still conquers Ethiopia with relative ease, and he's mad at Britain and France for imposing sanctions on him.
So you gained nothing by that. You allowed him to get away with it, but spoke out just enough against it to tick him off.
Meanwhile, here's Germany, who still wants to be buddies. For Hitler, this was an absolute win, because he looks over his shoulder and sees another fascist dictator being given a free pass to invade another country, and now, the only guy who would actually go to war with him over Austria is ready to be friends.
I honestly had not thought about the context of this, of how the actions of Italy with Ethiopia directly connect to the choices that Germany makes in the mid-1930s. I'm really glad that he's laying this out the way that he is.
Thus, in 1936, Germany and Italy signed their Best Friends Forever Protocol. They're going to support the fascists in Spain.
Oh, yeah.
Italy agrees to represent Germany's interests in the League of Nations. And Germany agrees to recognize the Italian Empire in Ethiopia.
See, whenever I thought about all this, I always thought about the Spanish Civil War as being the thing that brings these fascist dictators together. But as we always say, history is always connected, and you can always draw a line back from one thing to the thing before it to the thing before it, and that's what makes it challenging anytime you tell one of these stories, is where do you start, because it is all connected.
And Hitler passes Mussolini a note in the back of the class saying he'll be ready for war against Britain and France in 3 years. The clock is ticking. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away, Japan is getting ready to make a big decision. Like Italy, Japan was going through a breakup with Britain. Back in 1902, Britain and Japan entered an alliance that proved to be terrifically helpful for the Japanese. When Japan went to war with Russia, France was tempted to join the Russian side, but the thought of war with Britain kept them out of it. Then in World War...
Isn't it interesting, just a decade before their allies on the Western Front in World War I, there's the possibility at least of war there. We tend to think in the modern terms of France and Britain as these strong allies because of World War I and World War II. Same with the U.S. and Britain and the U.S. and France. Wasn't always that way.
War I, the alliance acted as Japan's official RSVP to join the war, score some easy wins, and sit at the negotiating table.
100%.
For 20 years, Britain was a solid ally and trading partner. Unfortunately, at a certain point, British attitudes toward Japan had cooled, and there were fears, even in 1921, that the U.S. and Japan might one day go to war.
War Plan Orange. The U.S. had a war plan in place, considering the strong possibility of an eventual war with Japan, because the one of the few places that the U.S. is doing colonial expansion is in the Pacific, gobbling up places like Hawaii and the Philippines.
In which case, sorry, but Britain didn't want to get pulled into a war against the US. Then, Japan takes over northeast China in 1931 and turns it into a puppet state called Manchukuo. And suddenly, they're neighbors with the Soviet Union, and they start having border disputes. For a while, the Japanese army was seriously debating whether they wanted to continue expanding south into China, or maybe go north into Russia.
Yeah, because remember, the Soviet Union is the successor of the Russian Empire, who had lost a pretty humiliating war to the Japanese. So that's again, the people who are the young people at the time of the Russo-Japanese War are many of them now in positions of authority in the Soviet Union.
That might be a little trickier, but they knew where to find allies, because it just so happened that a certain German mustachioed man-child had his own reasons.
That's the Bruno Ganz version of, I think he's Swiss, who he played Hitler brilliantly in the movie Downfall.
To dislike the Soviets. And as far as making an alliance with Japan goes, I am singling out Hitler and not the attitude of all of Germany for a reason. Germany had been investing in China for a long time. The Nazis actually sent a guy over to China to reorganize the Chinese army and make it more fascist. German businessmen liked China. It seemed like a lot of German diplomats liked China. One of Hitler's right-hand men was telling him an alliance with Japan would be terrible because Japan was going to pull an Italy and switch sides if they ever fought a war together.
Hermann Goering. So this just shows you, again, we talked earlier about the connection between Mussolini and Hitler, and this shows you how much in their form of government that's very top-heavy, that how much that it matters what the personal opinions and feelings are of the man at the top.
But Hitler and his foreign affairs minister had a thing for Japan. So in 1936, the same year that Germany and Italy signed their super best friends pact, Germany and Japan sign an anti-communist pact. Germany tried to...
The anti-Comintern, if you play the Hearts of Iron 4.
Then they hadn't just double-crossed China by inviting China to be a part of this totally unrelated alliance with China's biggest enemy, but, you know, Hitler was an opportunistic, bald-faced liar and a Nazi, so when Japan invaded China in 1937 and seemed to be doing all right, the Nazis decided might makes right and began cheering for the death of their erstwhile ally.
He says might makes right because that was indeed one of the main philosophies of fascism, is that if you have the power to do something and you do it, it's what's best. It's what's best for your country, to be able to kind of wield that power.
Thereafter, Hitler declared the Japanese to be honorary Aryans, or in German, expedient. Italy had also been trying to court Japan for a while in attempts to win over Britain, but Japan wouldn't give them the time of day because they didn't want to upset Britain any more than they had to. It wasn't until Japan invaded China again in 1937 and made itself an international pariah that Mussolini was waiting with a big stupid grin on his face. Italy joined the
He did kind of have a big stupid grin, didn't he? This goes to show listen, I understand that there are complexities to the Allies in World War II as well. You know, on one hand, you've got Britain and the United States who are very close, and of course the Allies like Canada and folks like that, all very close. France, gets overrun pretty early, and so it's a bit more complicated with them, especially once you have the Vichy government. And then, of course, the Soviet Union is more of an enemy of my enemy is my friend type of thing. Never really a lot of trust between them, so I guess maybe there's some similarities there. But Germany, Japan, Italy, it was never the same kind of close cooperation, your needs are my needs type of thing that, say, the US and Britain end up having.
Communist pact with Germany and Japan, and the Axis was kinda sorta complete. Then, surprise! A week before World War II, Hitler signs a treaty with the Communists. Italy and Japan are both blindsided. Not only has Hitler just promised to cooperate with Russia, he has also promised not to ally with any of the USSR's enemies. You know, like, say, hypothetically, a bunch of countries who had signed an anti-communist pact. Hitler makes up this whole story about how the anti-communist alliance was actually targeted against Western democracies, and Japan is like, what the fuck? No, it's not! We literally named it the Agreement Against the Communist International! Dude! Hitler then invades Poland in September 1939, not with support from the Axis, but from Stalin. France and Britain finally declare war on Germany and somehow continue to do nothing for 8 months.
And yeah, the phony war. So a lot of people ask the question, well, if the Soviets invaded Poland at the same time Germany did, why did Britain and France declare war on Germany and not on the Soviets? Well, because their defensive alliance with Poland was specifically targeted Germany. It specifically said it was a defense against an invasion by Germany. So they were treaty bound to protect Poland against Germany, not treaty bound to protect Poland against the Soviets.
June 1940, France is absolutely steamrolled, and Mussolini, feeling a little insecure about the size of his own empire, leaps into the war, hoping to get a seat at the table at the last possible minute.
This is what Italy did in World War I. They were kind of opportunistic. They were, what's in it for me, and how can we contribute so we can get something out of it. Not that they were the only ones who did that.
You don't have to be a part of this.
I'm in it, baby. Fascismos are fascist bros.
Only in September 1940, a year into the war in Europe, do all three members of the Axis formally ally with each other. Japan still wasn't exactly happy with Germany, but Hitler was somehow able to convince them, I'm not double-crossing you. I crossed China to you, crossed you to Russia, and then I'm going to cross Russia back to you. That's double-crossing. Uncrossed, then crossed back over. You're uncrossed! You know what? We gave up on invading Russia anyway. Friends? Yes, friends. Don't stop doing that. I don't like
He keeps batting his eyes at Hirohito. I love it.
it. Don't make me change my mind. Contrary to Mussolini's expectations, the war was not a 20-minute adventure where he could trade a few thousand dead Italians in exchange for free real estate. France went down quickly, but Italy was still fighting concurrent fronts in North and East Africa. And then, perhaps feeling a little insecure about the performance of his empire, Mussolini, with no warning to his allies, launches a third front in Greece. He then starts losing the war in Greece, opening up a convenient way for the British army to attack Germany from the rear.
Germany in either world war did not have particularly strong European allies. In fact, you could probably make the argument that they may in some ways have been better off to have no allies. They were constantly bailing out the Austro-Hungarians in World War I, and they're constantly having to clean up the Italian mess in World War II.
German command tells Hitler that Mussolini did something stupid and now they've got to invade Greece to cover for him. Hitler says, "He did what? That idiot! Hold my beer, we are invading Russia!" And on top of invading Greece, he catapults the German army into the USSR.
Absolutely insane to me, and I get it. It's who they were. It was a fundamental part of National Socialism. And I'm saying that word even though that's really not who they were anymore at that point because it's less likely to get dinged by the YouTube police. It never ceases to amaze me that they did something so fundamentally stupid. And we've had this conversation before about oil and all of that. And the bottom line is it's just they were a natural enemy and they were going to go at them. But in hindsight, it's the absolute mind-boggling decision of the war, and it sealed the fate of Germany.
Again, with zero warning to any of his allies. From the Japanese perspective, this entire alliance with Germany is basically useless now, because how the heck are Japan and Germany supposed to supply each other when the only uncontested trading route between them just got blitzkrieged? And yet, Japan was undeterred. He did what? Hold my Nihonshu, we're bombing America! And then when Hitler found out... Now, before I give you the news, I want to gently remind you that the Axis is a defensive alliance, and we do not have to declare war on anyone.
That's a great point right there, because this is another monumentally stupid decision. Germany had no obligation at that point to declare war on the United States. Japan had attacked the U.S., it was a defensive alliance. If the U.S. had attacked Japan, different story. And yes, the U.S. would have eventually gone to war with Germany anyway. But when Germany declares war, then the U.S. and Britain agree that it's going to be a Germany first policy. We're going to deal with Europe first, then we'll turn our sights full on Japan. So maybe it goes differently.
The Japanese He did what? Hold my second beer! We're going to war with America! It is worth appreciating just how many enemies the Axis made. This is a map of the world. The blue is the Axis, and the green is everyone they upset enough to go to war with them. To think that 3 countries... Oh wait, the Axis wasn't just 3 countries. Let me
Bulgaria?
introduce you to the circus's supporting cast. So there were
Finland?
a couple of other fascist governments that thought World War II sounded like a
Romania?
good time. Hungary joined for a little, quote, murder tourism that made the Germans uncomfortable. Romania joined to take back land from the USSR, even though they lost that land in the first place because of Hitler's agreement with the Soviets. Finland was a weird one, the only democracy to fight with the Axis powers, although they never signed the alliance and were mostly just fighting over some land that the Russians took from them.
Right, it's another enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing.
Then Iraq, in the middle of nowhere out here, they randomly became fascist in 1941. Suffice to say, the Axis was not so much a unified ideology, so much as a table full of ostracized school children telling themselves they're cooler than everybody else
Yeah,
anyway.
pretty much.
Instead of uniting to fight a single war against Britain and France, each one of these knobs started like 5 different wars and forced the others to cover for them. Japan loses like 5 final climactic battles in a row to the United States and has no one to cover for them. Italy lives up to its reputation as the soft underbelly of Europe, gets half liberated by the Allies in 1943. When that happens, Mussolini gets sacked and arrested by his own government. He's broken out of jail by the Germans, but I imagine his reaction was something like,
Hooray! Oh, you're not Italian. Why am I not happy to be getting out of prison right now? Fascist bros.
Mussolini is placed under house arrest by the Germans and made the figurehead of the puppet state they set up in northern Italy, but the Allied advance doesn't stop. Pretty soon, Mussolini is executed, and Germany's plans for world domination become—
Wow, the pinata thing is scarily accurate to what happened to Mussolini and his mistress.
How do we slow down the Soviets long enough to surrender to the West? Hitler auditions for a redemption arc by killing Hitler, but he doesn't get the part. Japan got bombed, Eastern Europe got the Iron Curtain, and to be honest, we all just kind of forgot about Finland.
That was really good. I enjoyed that. It was not only entertaining and also funny, but not inappropriately so, I didn't think. But it also told the story well, I thought. So let me know your thoughts. What do you think? And is there another Jack Rackham video that you'd like to see me cover that I haven't already? Let me know in the comment section below. I want to thank Jonathan in Rushville, Indiana, and William in Holiday, Tennessee for your support on Patreon. Thanks so much. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.